Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for your word. We pray that you will bless us this day. Pray you will help us to try to understand the times in which we live and how they fit into the area of Bible prophecy. Pray you watch over us today. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm getting some feedback on my mic, too. Okay. So if you want to put in the comments that my mic isn't working, we do know that. So, when the absurd becomes reality, here's some of the other platforms that we're on. It's become a game now with some of the big social media platforms. I'll talk about that in just a moment. These are some of the ones that you can find us as. If you just want the audio, Blog Talk Radio, Christian Sentinel is putting up an audio. We're looking at other alternatives for delivery of and storage of content and that type of thing. But we're probably a couple months away from getting that all in place, and that's if everything goes perfectly, which, it doesn't always with tech. So we talk about the convergence of events. And so this week I'm going to try to focus on just a few things. I'm going to do a little culture, sort of the state of the world and culture, and then we'll look at Israeli politics to finish out, because that's kind of an important thing. And as you know, there's been a recent elections in Israel over the past 2 years. There have been 4. It's like waterboarding an entire country. They have to listen to politicians that many times in campaigns. Although I don't know, I think a lot of people are probably shutting it out at this point. But it is a very disrupted world, and I won't even begin to scratch things. By the way, I'm going to do an interview tomorrow, 10 a.m. live, 10 a.m. Eastern. I think that's 1 a.m. Tuesday morning in Guam, in case anybody's listening from Guam. But David Fiorazzo, Stand Up for the Truth. You can stand up. I think it's standupforthetruth.com. By the way, I highly recommend that you get David's book, Canceling Christianity, that just came out. I did write an endorsement for that book. I think it's very well done. It deals with, the issue of what's going on in our world and culture, and sort of the tension that's there between, Christians. The tension is, or the question always is, what do Christians do? Do we fight it? Do we just go along with it? Do we just assume that this is the end times and that's the way that it's going to be? And my view, and I think this was a view that David would share, is that we don't know exactly when we're getting out of here. And until then, we've got to fight. We got to stand up for the truth, as David's show is called. So that's 10 a.m. live tomorrow, QFM, Q90 FM in Green Bay, Wisconsin. It does appear that times are getting late. So I'll just share a couple verses with you. One is, in Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20, it says, woe when men call good evil and evil good. And I think we're at that point in time where we see these just absurd things going on, and we just need to know that this is the way it's going to be in the end times, that people are being given over to a reprobate mind. If you want to know what Romans 1 is looking at when it's talking about a reprobate mind, look at what's going on in the world. Look at how people are acting. And it's people on both sides. Politically, it's people on both sides of the aisle. Not everybody, but there's certainly enough craziness to go around. The other verse that came to mind this week, I was exchanging some things with a friend in Israel, and I was sent this joke. I'll tell you the joke because I thought it was a pretty good joke. I won't give you the version that I read online, but I'll sort of clean it up. Bono from U2, he's woke, he's a social justice warrior, and he was doing a concert in Ireland, Belfast, Northern Ireland, and he stopped the crowd and silenced them, and he just started clapping his hands, very dramatically, as he's prone to do, and he said, every time I clap my hands, a child in Africa dies. To which some guy in the front row said, well, then quit doing it. Sort of the Irish practicality. But the other thing that thought to me too was in Psalm 121, it says that he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. And my response to what I was reading about the election was going, yeah, he can't, because of with a crazy political system like that, he just can't sleep, or the country would really fall apart. But let's look at some of the things that are going on now. This is an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. The People's Republic of Data. This is a big problem in the world. We've talked about vaccine passports and social credit systems and that sort of things. And there are things on the horizon that are very troubling. They would mean, I think, the end of freedom. There are people fighting them. There are states that say, no, we're not going to go along with it. But there are countries that are saying, or companies, and countries, but companies here in the U.S. For example, there was a lawsuit down in Houston where a bunch of healthcare workers said they did not want to get that thing in their arm. You know what I'm talking about? And the federal judge dismissed their case yesterday, saying, nope, you can't bring a claim on that. The employer can decide whether they can require you to get that or not. And that's I think, consistent with what I understand the state of the law to be. Now, the law can always be changed, but that's the state of the law right now. And some people are backing off, some are getting stronger on what they're going to require, that type of thing. But there's this enormous amount of data out there, and China really wants to control that. China enacted a law in response, I think it was a shot across the bow against countries that want to put sanctions on China for what they're doing. There's plenty of articles now out there about people looking into the origins of COVID-19. Did it come from a leak in the lab? Whether intentional or unintentional, I don't know that we'll ever know that, but there's a lot of people talking about it. 10 months ago, you could not talk about it. If you talked about it, you were banned from Facebook and social media platforms. There's still things that you can't talk about, COVID-19, or you'll get banned. And so if we ever talk about them in detail, we'll put it up on the Rumble side of the account. I guess to get around the censors, there's no sense playing the little games and using code words and that type of thing. But there is a big concern about data. Look at this graphic. This is from the article in the Wall Street yesterday. Data generated by each country, China and the US. And those 40, it's zettabytes of data. A zettabyte is 1 trillion gigabytes. That's a lot of data. And all that data, it just doesn't exist out in the middle of the air. It actually exists in computers and data centers. And so you see the growth here. You see from 2021, China and the US are under 20 zettabytes each. By 2025, they're going to be approaching 50 zettabytes, up 2.5 times, 2 to 2.5 times in just 4 years. And that's the growth of data. And as we've said here a lot, data, the growth in data and information does not correspond to growth in wisdom. Wisdom is on the other side. If you could turn that upside down for the wisdom graph, at least my observation of the world. And some of this appears locally. Now, this is a picture taken back in 2016 or 2017 here in New Albany, down off Beach Road. This is what it looked like. Now, I'd not been down there. I've been down there a couple times over the past week and a half. And I don't know if you've been down there, south of 161 on Beach Road. It's shocking. This is what it looks. This is a picture taken last year, and you see this big. So there's 161 up there at the top. There's Beach Road going south. North is at the top, and you see those big white buildings there. That's a Facebook data center. Now, that's not what it looks like. This is what the projected, or this is what the artist architectural rendering was of what that was going to look like. So that's looking to the east. So that's that field that I showed you. And there they have 3 buildings. They actually have 2 built and 3 under construction right now. Those buildings, to give you some idea of the size, when I was talking to somebody about it, I said, I think the buildings are 1,000 feet long. And I looked it up. They're 1,200 feet long, 4 football fields long. And they're maybe up to 5 stories, 6 stories tall. This is what a hallway looks like. I mean, that's almost a quarter of a mile long. Now, that's Facebook's side of Beach Road. On the other side of Beach Road, and by the way, the Facebook investment, they actually had these little scooters to get around for the employees to get around, highly secure, and that's where all this data is. That's where these zettabytes of data is. That's Facebook. Across Beach Road, by the way, I forgot to say it, the Facebook side of Beach Road, they've spent $1 billion constructing that and putting it together. Across the road are similar sized data centers that are being built by Google, YouTube and Google. And by no means is New Albany, Ohio, the only place where these things are, but if you haven't driven down there, it's really, can I be honest with you, it's kind of creepy that all that data is there and being stored. I showed pictures to a friend of mine who talks about Bible prophecy a lot, and his comment was, that's the mind of the beast, man. That's what's being done. Well, here's a couple things culturally. Now, this is an old editorial from the New York Times back in April, and it was written by the head of Planned Parenthood. Sometimes reality even hits corrupt people in the face. And so what is the title of this? I'm the head of Planned Parenthood. We're done making excuses for our founder, Margaret Sanger. And she says, we must reckon with Margaret Sanger's association with white supremacist groups in eugenics. Now, people in the pro-life community have pointed out the problems with Margaret Sanger and before her Darwin and his theories, and Margaret Sanger taking them a step forward for eugenics to get rid of black babies. That was a lot of the purpose of Planned Parenthood. And finally, the president, and when pro-life people pointed this out for decades and decades and decades, the Planned Parenthood people said, no, that's not what she meant. Or we don't do that. The statistics show that that's exactly what they do by and large. And so now they say, now they're getting it, but they're not getting it. You understand? They've been caught with reality. And I don't know how long this person will stay as the president of Planned Parenthood. I think she succeeded the daughter of the former Texas governor who was head of Planned Parenthood for a long time. In her article, though, because she's still woke, she's still into all of this politically correct nonsense, because she says this in one of her paragraphs. And sometimes that's how Planned Parenthood has acted. By privileging whiteness, we've contributed to America harming black women and other women of color. And when we focus too narrowly on women's health, we have excluded trans and non-binary people. In other words, she just can't get to a good, solid biblical worldview about men and women. It's just not possible for her. She's got to throw that in. Now, a few weeks ago, I played for you a clip of someone in the administration who was interviewed, and in the interview, she mentioned that we have to take care of birthing people. Do you remember that? Well, what are birthing people? Well, they're mothers, right? But see, in today's woke, politically correct culture, you have to assume that, I guess, that men or trans women, which I can never remember which direction they're going, but that men can give birth too. Dennis Prager plays a clip on his show all the time. He was on Bill Maher's show might have been late 2019 or early 2020. And in it he said the left is crazy. They believe that men menstruate. And all the people on the panel who were leftists, they laughed at him and they said, nobody believes that. Yes, they do believe that. It's always amazing to me in these arguments. You will bring up what somebody says that's just insane and against reality, usually from the left, and then all the people on the left will argue with you. Well, no, they never said that. Where are you getting that? You're making it up. Because what's important in culture today is not truth. It's narrative. There's always a narrative to shape your reality. This is 1984 come to life. This is the way cultural revolutions have taken place in large countries in the past, one of which I've just talked about. They try to control the narrative. And if I don't mention it when I talk about the Israeli elections, because that's important, there is a narrative there that they're trying to push against Netanyahu. This is postmodern. I looked in my notes. 20 years ago in August, I spoke at a church conference, and I talked about the rise of postmodernism. That postmodernism was coming into the church through a thing that later eventually became known as the emerging or emergent church. And it was always interesting in that conversation. You would say, well, the emerging church is postmodern. Well, I don't know what the emerging church is. I've heard of an emergent church, John, but what's the emergent church? Well, it's the emerging church that's emerged. And they would argue with you. And I've said this is not going to be good for Christianity because people will question truth. Because you heard Rob Bell and Rob McLaren and Doug Padgett and all the leaders of that postmodern movement that swept over evangelicalism that I talked about over and over and over again. And I talked about it at that conference in California in July or August of 2001, about 6 weeks before 9/11. And I had pastors push back on me and say, John, you don't understand, this postmodern thing will be good for the church. Now, who was right in that analysis? I would submit to you that I was right, that it was not a good thing, and now we see it. And so this was apparent it's always been part of propaganda. It was apparent and it came into the church. And now we don't really talk about the emergent or emerging church, do we? Why? My thesis is, and I think it's supportable by the facts, is that it did get incorporated into the evangelical church by and large. And that's why we have a lot of the problems that we do with the evangelical church today, because truth is not that important. So when this person in the administration talked about birthing people, a lot of people were saying, well, that's not what she meant. Don't get your don't get all tied up in knots about it, John. You're just not worried about it. Here's an excerpt from the president's proposed budget to Congress. You know, the budget that's about that tall, and the money that's spent is about, 7 skyscrapers tall. Reduces maternal mortality rate and ends race-based disparities in maternal mortality. So that's the start of the paragraph. The United States has the highest maternal mortality rate among developed nations, with an unacceptably high mortality rate for Black American, Indian, Alaska Native, and other women of color. To help end this high rate of maternal mortality and race-based disparities and outcomes among birthing people. Now listen, they just used the word maternal 3 times. So there are some people in our Congress and Senate that had the lady who used the birthing people phrase, and then the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Becerra, who testified. And so I'm going to play a couple clips of them. So first is the lady who's used the phrase the first time I heard it, and then the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And watch him, watch his body language and the way he talks. So first, here's this question.
The budget requests $26 million to reduce maternal mortality and eliminate race-based disparities in outcomes among, quote, birthing people. This is a shift from recent budgets, which referred to maternal health issues as women's issues. I've never heard the term before. Can you explain what it means?
Absolutely. There are certain people who do not have gender identities that apply to female or male. And so we think our language needs to be more inclusive in how we deal with complex issues.
Okay. By the way, if I could just ask, what's the sign behind her on the door say? Where is her mask? I looked at the G7 leaders, Merkel, Macron, Biden, all sitting around the table, Boris Johnson, all coming from countries that have strict mask requirements. And what was one thing you didn't see around the table? Mask. As I said, if hypocrisy was water, the world would drown. So here's the questioning of the Secretary of Health and Human Services about the same terminology. Listen, this what she says just doesn't make any sense. She's so wrapped up in this language nonsense that it's absurd. But this is a real person who's running real programs with real millions of dollars in their budget in our government. And they believe this nonsense.
As you changed a term in your budget work, you shifted from using the term mother to birthing people rather than mother. Can you help me get a good definition of birthing people?
Well, I'll check on the language there, but I think if we're talking about those who give birth, I think we're talking about, I don't know how else to explain it to you other than
I was a little taken back when I just read it and saw it, that the term mother was gone in spots and it was replaced with birthing people. And I didn't know if this was a direction that you were going, if there were shifts, if there are regulatory changes that are happening related to that, or what the purpose of that is.
I think it's probably, and again, I'd have to go back and take a look at the language that was used in the budget, but I think it simply reflects the work that's being done.
I definitely get that. I would only say the language is important always. We don't want to offend in our language. I get that. But would you at least admit calling a mom a birthing person could be offensive to some moms, that they don't want to get like a happy birthing person card in May, or, I mean, can you at least admit that that term itself could be offensive to some moms?
Senator, I'll go back and take a look at the terminology that was used, and I can get back to you. But again, if we're trying to be precise in the language that's used.
Mom's a pretty good word. That's worked for a while, and I think that's pretty precise as well.
Does anybody feel like, I mean, this is like we're living like in a Monty Python skit. Aren't we? I hope, no, we are. It's not a skit though, that's the problem. It's the absurd has become reality. Now there's another law that was put on the books. I don't have a picture of it. I think it was Senate Bill 1260. It's Innovative and Technology Act. And some of the Republican senators, not all of them by the way, some are all for this, they said, wait a minute, the language is so broad. We're concerned that you could do embryo research and make these embryos half human or part human and part animal. Chimeras they're called, chimeras. So Senator Braun introduced here's his introduction of his amendment to the bill to outlaw that, to say, no, you can't use federal research dollars to do that. This is happening in labs all over the world now, folks. Question now is whether the federal government is going to directly fund it. What do you think the Biden administration is going to do? So Senator Braun proposed this. I'll just play a minute clip of what he had only a minute to speak. Like it's not that important an issue. He gets a whole minute. And here's what he had to say about his proposed amendment.
In recent years, research involving human-animal hybrids has become much more prevalent. For example, in April, researchers in China created a monkey-human hybrid embryo that they allowed to grow and study for weeks. I have serious ethical concerns with this type of human chimera research. My amendment would ban the practice by applying the NIH's current anti-chimera policy universally. Due to the dangerous and offensive nature of this research, my amendment imposes penalties on those that participate in this unethical research. We must act now. Just this morning, the International Society for Stem Cell Research, an international standards setting body, issued guidance that permits the creation of human-animal hybrids. I ask that my Senate colleagues reject this foreign position and maintain our own NIH's ethical standards. All life is sacred. It is Congress's responsibility to enact common sense.
Senator's time has expired.
Bioethics. Please support this amendment.
And what do you think they did with the amendment when it came up for a vote? They voted it down. Now, they'll say, well, that's not really provided for in the legislation, so I don't know why he's making this proposal. Well, he's making this proposal because he's actually looking at the news and he's seeing what's going on with reports. I read a report, a journal article this week. It was in the Journal of the American Psychoanalytic Association. I bet they have a rip-roaring good time at their conventions. And the title of the article, you can look it up, on having whiteness. And it talked about how whiteness is a malignancy, essentially, that you can't get rid of. See, this is what's the problem. This is leftism that we see running rampant through our culture it's a religion. But in that religion, unlike Christianity, we have this glorious gospel of Jesus Christ that offers redemption to all who believe on the full, complete, finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross to save us from our sins, to get us right with God. In leftism, there is no redemption. I would submit to you that ultimately there's only death and despair. The whole culture is going like that. There were reports out this week about among teenagers and young people, they are very unhappy on scales that have just never been seen in American culture. So my earlier statement is, you got to fight this because there are lives and souls at stake. Now, I'm not saying go out with clubs. You understand that. But you got to stand up against this. At some point, Jude has this example, the book of Jude, talking about false teachers. It says, some rescue as if you're dragging them out of the fire. Well, we're on fire. And people are being destroyed. And I'll say it again. Look, if you're a grandparent, help your kids homeschool your grandchildren. Get them out of schools because this is just going everywhere. More about that in a moment. So Disney came up. They have this artist contest. So here's one kid and what he did for his this is a artist thing that he did. You see the art that becomes a flower, and it's a plate of cookies that becomes a flower. And you'll see about who it's about in just a moment. And you'll see how this image morphs into someone that's fairly well known in our culture and world today. Making history her story. Now listen, assigning messianic godlike qualities to any politician, left or right, is very bad. You should not do that. There's only one Moshiach who's coming, who's been here, and he's coming back. But you're going to see more and more of this. People doing this, of giving almost godlike qualities to people. This is the new Time magazine that will be coming out this week. I think that's 007 is now our president. Very cool, and he's got Putin in his sights. Now, do you see the narrative? This is pure propaganda cover from Time. And we know where they lean politically and that type of thing. We know, for example, there were a series of covers on Time magazine back during the prior president's administration that they weren't making him look like 007. In fact, when Biden came into office, this was the Time cover, day one. And now this is the current Time magazine that's out. It's an animated title. Will never be the same. That's pretty accurate, actually. This fight goes on in the schools. One school, they had trouble with, Columbus Day. Then it was Indigenous Peoples Day, and people reacted to that. So what they did was they just said, they're not going to have any more holiday names. They'll just have days off. Because again, why? The narrative has to be done, because any naming of something after somebody is bad. Now, I don't have the video clip for this. The audio was not that good. This lady, they're having a battle in Loudoun County, Virginia. Talked a little bit about it last week over critical race theory. And the Loudoun County School Board has doubled down on it. And now people are coming in that are supporting it. And they're saying, we've got to have this is the truth. Critical race theory is the truth. It's a lie. It's racist at its core. And I'm grateful for all the parents and people who are going to school boards all over the country and standing up against this nonsense. And they're getting cut off, and they're getting called racist. Some of them even are losing their jobs over it. So these are courageous people that are standing up for truth and what's right. So this is an article. This is from a local news station down there in Loudoun County, Virginia. And this lady gets up. I'm a naturalized citizen from China. I'll just sort of read the article. The Cultural Revolution began when she was 6 years old, she said, and immediately pitted students and teachers against one another by hanging big posters in hallways and the cafeteria where students could write criticisms against anyone deemed ideologically impure. This is the Cultural Revolution in China. She lived through it. Estimates, 25 to 50 million people were killed in the Cultural Revolution by Mao, who is held up as a hero by the founders of certain protest movements in the United States and people in Congress and in the administration and in the White House. And in the White House control room. We think we know where that is. She said this, one of the teachers was considered bourgeoisie because she liked to wear pretty clothes, so the students attacked her and spit on her. She was covered with spit, and pretty soon it became violence. Communist squads would raid homes and destroy any relics of China's past culture, history, governments, and religion, she said. Everything that was considered old, feudalist, abase, Buddhas, everything was taken out and smashed. We were asked to report if we hear anything about someone saying anything that showing that there's a lack of complete loyalty to Mao. There were people reporting their parents, and their parents ended up in jail at 26 years old. She finally made it out, traveling to the U.S., where she immediately found freedom she had never been able to enjoy before. I felt like it's such a free country. I have access to all sorts of information, books on both sides of the issues. But she said in the current political and cultural climate in the U.S., however, she felt that some of that freedom is eroding. I can't really just say what I mean, even though the other side can say whatever, she said. To me, and to a lot of Chinese, it is heartbreaking that we escaped communism and now we experience communism here. The communist regime used the same critical theory to divide people. The only difference is they used class instead of race. She said she witnessed students and teachers turn against each other during the pogrom and saw schools change their names to be politically correct. I'll bet they changed the names of holidays too. We were taught to denounce our heritage, and Red Guards destroyed anything that is not communist. We were also encouraged to report on each other, just like the Student Equity Ambassador Program and the critical race theory education system that they've adopted in Loudoun County. She said it's the same thing. It should have no place in our schools. 246 years ago, another Virginian said this, "Give me liberty or give me death." He said that in Richmond, 125 miles to the south. So I'm grateful for this lady being sort of now in the show notes that we put with the video description. We'll put a link to this document. It's called Combating Critical Race Theory in Your Community. It comes from the Citizens for Renewing America. By the way, this document, linked to it, was posted on Twitter the other day, and the post was immediately removed. Now it's back. But do you understand? So when you drive down Beach Road, there's a fight going on here. You can drive by their buildings, my friends. I should go out and apply for a job and see if they'll hire me. Let's see how long that would last. So it tells you what critical race theory is, things you can do, how you can go to your school board, what you should say, what you should do, how you can organize, that type of thing. It's a great resource. 68 pages, 90 pages. You can download it, all kinds of information to help people out. But in terms of thought, our country is on fire. And I note this is from the New York Times and other weather reports this week. The dark red, the dark areas are extreme, severe, unprecedented drought. And red is approaching it. When they say 11% in extreme drought, now the number's like 27%. And I know the desert Southwest has always been the desert Southwest, but this is something that's not been seen for decades, if then. It's at the start of the growing season. You need to get some food and stuff stored up. I was going to post this. I didn't have time the other day. About a year ago, I was over in Springfield, Ohio, and I went down to fill up my tank of my little Prius, which I love filling up the tank of my Prius when I'm sitting next to an SUV. It's a wonderful thing to watch. And I got gas, I had it like 10 cents a gallon off. I got gas for like 89 cents a gallon. And here we are, less than a year later, and what's gas? $3.15 most places. I hear it's approaching $6 or maybe over $6 in California. I'm getting very nostalgic now. I remember in America where we were energy independent, it was like less than a year ago. Keystone Pipeline, done. Arctic Wildlife Refuge leases for oil and gas that have been around for what, 40 years? Gone. Terminated. Russian Nord Stream pipeline to get gas to Europe? Go ahead, Putin. That pipeline's okay. Somebody pushed back on me when I said this last week. It was like, well, you know, the Keystone Pipeline wasn't built yet. Yeah, I know. There were like 20,000 people building it with jobs, real jobs. Okay, so enough of the couple things that are going on in AI terms. Navy and Boeing make aviation history with the MQ-25 becoming the first unmanned aircraft to refuel another aircraft. Seth Fransman has a book, I think it's out now, called Drone Wars. He's from the Jerusalem Post. You might want to get it. This is changing warfare and how people analyze warfare. And now we have refuelers that are remote operated. At least the first test ones are showing to be successful. It's actually not a bad thing. I have a friend who used to serve as a navigator on refuelers. Sometimes I'd ask him, what'd you do last week? And he says, well, I went to Greenland, then we went to Australia, and then I came home so I could go back to work on Monday. But these things are very volatile, as you can appreciate. They're filled with fuel. And then here's another one. This is from the Department of Defense, U.S. Department of Defense. Ghost Fleet Overlord Unmanned Surface Vessel Program completes second autonomous transit to the Pacific. Now we have ghost ships. And this is changing the way, but you need to understand that you don't need the logistics to be involved with an aircraft carrier if it's remotely controlled. You don't need groceries for 5,000 crew members. But then again, small country that has terrorist leanings, they don't need 5,000 soldiers or Navy crew on a ship like that either. We're in a very strange area, and I'm not even talking about the UFO thing that everybody else is talking about. Because I don't know what it is yet. The report hasn't come out. I mean, the report, I'm pretty sure, is going to be very non-specific. That there are things going on that we can't explain. Personally, I think it's demonic. The increase in it means increase in demonic activity, which is one of the things I would expect as we get closer to the return of the Lord. So let's look at a few other things here. This is not necessarily in... here's a federal judge. He overturned California's 3-decade-old assault weapons ban. He said the ban was a failed experiment. California's governor called for the ruling a direct threat to public safety. I think Governor Newsom is a direct threat to public safety for many, many reasons. Now, I'm going to kind of bounce around a little bit. The Iranian cleric who founded Hezbollah before Nasrallah, he died of COVID this week. Anti-Semitism continues to grow in a lot of places. This is from the Jewish Chronicle in the UK. And you see the headlines. This is in a Jewish newspaper. Drama students are terrified of being identified as Jewish. Look at the headline on the right. Well, below, Equity Row as Jewish actors fear being blacklisted in this medieval hate and Holocaust slurs on display at rally for Palestinians in London. And I'm pretty sure that's Hyde Park there in that picture that Brian just had up. And that picture, that's Hyde Park. That's Speaker's Corner. That's supposedly the big free speech place. So you can go there and do that, and you can post this stuff on Twitter, and you won't get banned. But if you post something to fight critical race theory, you're putting your account at risk. And this is the reality in the UK. This is happening in the United States as well. We have a person in Congress who posted a tweet this week that really put an equivalent between what Israel and the United States does to what Hamas does and the Taliban. That's Congressman Ilhan Omar. Even Nancy Pelosi's pushing back on this one. So that ought to tell you how bad it was. And of course she said, oh, I'm just the one war crimes investigated. Baloney. I don't believe it. Now this is I don't have the video of this, but this reporter was outside the Damascus Gate in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood that I've talked about, the one where there's this dispute going on. Jewish people had bought and built homes there starting in the late 1800s. When Jordan took it over, Arabs came and took over the homes. And for 40 years, they've been trying to get their homes back or get paid rent. And this is the big flashpoint. So this reporter, really propagandist for Al Jazeera, she was arrested. And oh boy, the journalists all over the world are, oh, well, look, it was terrible. Look, they broke her arm. It's just awful what they did. And there's pictures of her, with her arm in a cast. And I didn't get the video put in. I had the video. Okay, so she was arrested, beat up. I was tortured. So this is in the afternoon. The next morning, this is what she looks like. And I can show you the video. You can go find it on elsewhere. 10 minutes later, she's hugging her children, patting them on the back and stuff like this. This is a made-up, fake propaganda piece. This happens all the time. Well, I said I was going to talk about it. I'm trying to remember what. Okay. So let's set this up. This is going to kind of bounce around a little bit. So when all this stuff started going on in the Temple Mount, remember I showed you the pictures of the fire and everything? I believe the next day they were supposed to have what's called the Flag Day Parade, the Flag Parade, or Parade of Flags in Jerusalem. It's where they do things like this. I know this is shocking, and this is incredibly offensive behavior, that they would actually, in Israel, in Jerusalem, their capital, take an Israeli flag, bunches of Israeli flags, and they would actually celebrate the fact that we have a country called Israel. I know that's highly offensive to some people. It's not to me, by the way. I was there on a Flag Day once. If you believe Israel has a significance prophetically, it's a very emotional thing to watch. It will move you to the core of your soul. So, but then as the election took place and they got closer to the election, Hamas starts saying, if you have that flag parade, we're going to start throwing rockets into Israel again. So what do the politicos in Jerusalem do? Cancel the parade flag. We'll postpone it for a while. And this is what Jerusalem's deputy mayor said: walking with Israeli flags is fermenting, but is walking with pride flags in front of the great synagogue okay? This is a net political question. If thousands of policemen could be assigned to last week's pride parade, then the Flag Day parade, the Flags Parade, can also be secured. So they've been going back and forth. It looks like they're going to get this thing put together. So that was over the last couple weeks. This has been bouncing back and forth, and it looks like it may happen next week. But now they're saying, well, you can't march through the Damascus Gate, through the Old City to the Western Wall Plaza, the Kotel, because that would be provocative. So we're going to have to change the route. We're going to go in through the Jaffa Gate down by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Look, is it provocative? If you understand what's going on over there, carrying an Israeli flag through the Muslim quarter, unless you're in a big crowd of other people doing it, could be a very dangerous thing to do. But the Jaffa Gate goes through the Armenian, into the Christian quarter, Armenian and Jewish quarter, and you're probably going to be able to make it then. So yeah, they're trying to make a statement. They really are trying to make a statement about who's in charge. And underneath it is this constant war. In fact, Jonathan Spire, when he wrote in the Weekend Australian a couple weeks ago, he said this about what's going on. This series of events is a reminder that Jerusalem, and in particular its Old City, and in particular its Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif, remains the absolute center point of the long dispute between Jews and Arab Muslims for sovereignty west of the Jordan River. He's exactly right. And that's what the Bible says, that Jerusalem will be a cup of trembling. So I'm going to ask you a question. Is it right now a cup of trembling? Absolutely. There's no question that it's a cup of trembling right now. Could it ramp up? Yeah, it probably will ramp up. The other thing that happened in connection, so they're swearing in a new government today, maybe while I'm talking. Naftali Bennett will be the new prime minister. And I've got a couple things to say about that. But first, what's happening is there's a complete changing of the old guard in Israel right now. I mean, Netanyahu's been prime minister for 12 years, and he was prime minister back in the late 90s for a few years. So he's 15 years out of the last 25, he's been the prime minister. By everything that I know is he's gone, as he's no longer prime minister as of today. He will be heading up the opposition, although they're talking about replacements for him as head of the Likud party. People are tired of him. They don't like him. They think he's arrogant, corrupt. There's all sorts of things that they say about him. Very interesting parallel to the things that are said about him, that are said about somebody who used to be president of the United States, whether you like him or not. There's a stunning parallel between things that are going on. But back May 31st, June 1st, June 2nd, they changed the head of the Mossad. Yossi Cohen left office, and they put in a new guy. And they had a ceremony to do that. But it's interesting that one of the things, Yamina, now they say they didn't do this, but there is legislation that's been introduced in the Knesset to bar they don't say we want to bar Netanyahu from running for office again. They say things like, well, if anybody served at least 2 terms as a prime minister, then they can't run for prime minister for a certain period of time. So there are about 8.5 billion people on planet Earth. Of all those people, there is one person to whom that law would apply. Now, the people say, well, we're not targeting Netanyahu. That's a little bit incredible that you would even say that. How foolish do you think we really are? And so they're trying to prevent him from getting into office. So he went to the ceremony to swear in the new head of the Mossad, and he said this, first of all, we need to choose, and I hope it will not happen, between friction with our great friend the U.S. and getting rid of an existential threat. Getting rid of an existential threat must prevail. It falls on all of you, on the political leadership of the State of Israel, and on you, David, that's the head of the Mossad. All of you must do everything to ensure that that Iran will never arm itself with a nuclear weapon. Now that was very controversial in Israel. And so this is Netanyahu. He's still fighting to remain prime minister when he said this about a week and a half ago. But he said, listen, if it comes down to defending Israel or offending the U.S. over this Iran thing, I'm defending Israel. Prime Minister, or new defense, well, he was the existing defense minister, Benny Gantz. He's head of the Blue and White Party, and in the new government, he will continue to be the defense minister. Now, he was former head of the IDF, and I think there's a lot of things that he gets. I think he understands somewhat the threat. But this is the concern that people have with the new government. But this is what he said in response to this. Iran poses a threat to regional security and global peace. It supports terrorism and is pursuing nuclear plans that pose an immediate threat to the state of Israel. Nonetheless, Israel remains the strongest country within a 1,500-kilometer radius from Jerusalem. The U.S. has been and will continue to be Israel's most important ally, protecting Israel's security and safeguarding its qualitative edge in the region. The Biden administration is a true friend of Israel, and Israel doesn't have and will never have a greater partner than the United States. Even if differences arise, they will be resolved through direct dialogue behind closed doors and not through provocative statements that serve to harm Israeli security. So you understand what he said there. That's the translation of what he said in Hebrew, and what he's saying is, Netanyahu, shut up. We're in charge now. Now, the head of the Mossad has a lot of responsibilities. This is a clip of that I pulled off a Syrian website called Southfront. And over the past few weeks, there have been a series of fires in Iran. This has been happening for a while now. Aside from the assassination of Soleimani and Farizad, the head of the nuclear program, there have been a number of fires, explosions. My understanding is there have been billions of dollars of damage done in Iran through these strange things. It included, I think I mentioned it last week, the largest ship in the Iranian Navy. I think you'll see a picture of that, a little clip of that here in just a moment, burned. So you had a refinery at Tehran, you had a soft drink factory at Tehran, and I think what you're going to find out, if people were able to dig into this and find out, is that these fires are all at Iranian Revolutionary Guard front companies. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard is given a portfolio of businesses that they can use to fund operations and pay people off. And over the last 20 years, they have consolidated their operations. So another thing that happened was there was that fire. There's the fire at the Tehran refinery. I think you're going to find that these were associated with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So this has been a problem for a while. So now Israel has apparently a new government. They were able to cobble together a coalition of 61, and this is after the results of the election. So they had 57 in the anti-Netanyahu bloc. They had 11 that were non-committed. You'll see the 11 non-committed, 7 came from the Yamina Party, which is the New Right, and 4 from the United Arab List, which is the Ram Party, which is an Islamist party I'm going to talk about in just a moment. So what they did, it used to be a pro-Netanyahu bloc, And you'll see, even if Netanyahu got Yamina, and Naftali Bennett, the head of Yamina, was going to go into a coalition with Netanyahu. 30 Likud, Shas, United Toward Judaism and Religious Zionism, the Orthodox groups, they had 52. With Yamina's 7, they would have had 59. They need 61. So at the time, Netanyahu reached out to the United Arab List, the Ram Party. It didn't work. For whatever reason, I think that maybe there was, the article I'll share with you in just a moment indicated that the Likud was making too many demands of the Ram Party that they just couldn't go along with. But now, Naftali Bennett reached out to some other right parties, and he's been able to they've come up with a coalition of 61, including the 4. So you have Yesh Atid, that's Lapid's party. You have Yisrael Betanayu, that's Avigdor Lieberman's party. Labor, New Hope, that's Gideon Sa'ar. Those 6 people used to be in Likud. So you can see if Netanyahu had those, he would almost be over the top with. So Likud, 6 people left Likud and formed a party. So now what they've done is they've essentially exchanged a government that had religious Orthodox and right parties in the current Netanyahu coalition, at least as of a couple of years ago. And they had these 4 elections in between. But they've exchanged the right-leaning Orthodox parties for the left-leaning parties. And they'll say that Lapid is center or center-left. I'm not sure I agree with that. Blue and White, that's Gantz's party. That's, he's a former IDF guy, so he has some right qualities. But you saw what he just said in response to what Netanyahu said about the existential threat to Israel. So this is all very complicated. And so, as I said, when I quoted Psalm 121, he that keeps Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep, it's true. God can't with this kind of mess going on. This is just insane. It's the most, it's like quantum physics. Remember Chuck Missler used to say, quantum physics is something that can only be understood by incredibly gifted and trained physicists and 3-year-olds. Well, I would say that's the same thing that you could say about Israeli politics. It can only be understood by gifted political scientists and political people who act like 3-year-olds a lot of the time. It's an insane system. And the right parties, the Orthodox parties, they've taken advantage of this. They've used this, they've got it so that they don't have to serve in the armed forces, and then go to yeshiva and study the Torah set and make babies. And Israel likes that because they want to have the demographic build-up that the Orthodox parties give them. And some of them aren't even really in favor of the state of Israel either. Not all of these are, but some of them are not. So it's a crazy system. Now the left is going to come in. And so this is an article from, I think, is I-24 News. On the eve of the new government swearing in, few Israelis trust it will last. It's provoked a lot of reaction. Bennett, as I said, is supposed to be sworn in as the head of the government. But look at this. There are 121 members of Knesset. He got 7. He got like 5% of the members of Knesset and about 6% of the popular vote. So the guy with 6% of the popular vote is going to be the new prime minister. And the question is, how much is he going to have to compromise? And now they have this Ram party, which is an Islamist party. Let me just tell you a little bit about that. This So this article from Israel Home this morning, they talk about the negotiations that went on when Netanyahu was trying to get Mansour Abbas to come into the coalition. And he said, when we ask him to Mansour Abbas, not Mahmoud Abbas, but Mansour Abbas, the head of the Ram party. It's an Islamist Muslim Brotherhood associated party. When we asked him to recognize the national rights of the Jewish people over the land of Israel, he hinted that it might happen in the future, but that today it would be political suicide and perhaps even existential suicide, a real threat to his life. As far as I'm concerned, said Halevi, this is the Likud member, Abbas reached out to the Jablonski formulation of the Iron Wall without infringing on our national rights here in Israel. On a practical level, in meetings with Rabbi Druckmann, he laid down much more limited demands in a civil platform that Bennett gave to him. I say this from my own personal information. I was there. He also made it clear to us that he personally expressed support for the Abrahamic agreements, but as a member of the Joint Arab List at the time, he had to oppose them publicly. And so the question is, this guy's going to be in the Security Cabinet, his party. He's going to have a seat on the Security Council. And so now there's an Islamist in charge of that. And so, look, it's fair criticism to say, well, Netanyahu was trying to get him to come into the government too. But Netanyahu didn't succeed. Naftali Bennett did, and Naftali Bennett has brought him in, assuming the swearing in takes place today. And he signed all the agreement. But there's no question that this party this Arab party is very problematic. Caroline Glick, who I trust a lot, doesn't like it. So now we have what's going to happen with Israel. That's everybody's question. Is it over? Is it done with? Is the country on the brink of going away? And the question is, it's very touch and go, in my view. Now, there was also, you need to know, during this process, there was a Mike Evans, who runs the Friends of Zion Museum, built the Friends of Zion Museum in Jerusalem. Some of you might have been there. It's nice. I think it's deficient in a lot of, I've said what I think is deficient about it. We won't go into that today. But it's a nice place, for Christians to go. He does the Jerusalem prayer breakfast. They held that this week. But he wrote this horrible editorial op-ed in Times of Israel. You can go read it, about the striptease show of Israeli politics. And he just went way overboard. And then Monday, he did a press conference in Jerusalem, and he doubled down on some of his stuff. He apologized some to Naftali Bennett, but then he didn't carry it through to the end. Now, this is, I think, going to have an impact on Israeli Christian, evangelical Christian relations. So I know people have flown there, Joel Rosenberg, John Hagee, trying to smooth this over. And they had the prayer breakfast. I don't think Mike Evans participated in that, but it's a problem. And so this, again, is the tension that, we support Israel unconditionally, but that doesn't mean that we can't criticize them. I mean, the Jerusalem Post writers criticize our government all the time. And as someone who, I guess you would call me a Christian Zionist, I believe we're in this process of biblical prophecy being fulfilled. And I support Israel. I love Israel. And I've been criticized by people, and they say, well, you're just an Israel supporter. You don't understand all the Rothschild, blah, 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 the fake Jews and all this other nonsense that they throw at you. I'm like, I don't support everything Israel did. I don't. I think they should have bombed Iran years ago. So I don't support everything that they do. Well, that really sets them off when I do that. But I do believe that. They have an existential threat here in Iran. You'll see a little bit more about that in a moment. So here's Caroline Glick's article in Friday's Israel Hayom. Let's see, this must have been last week's. Okay, so why is my email not opening up? Well, her article this Friday, and I'll just read a little bit of it, The Great Unraveling. Because what she's saying is, listen, with the Biden administration that we have now, we have a major problem. There's the article, The Great Unraveling. Over the past decade, she says, for the first time in its history, Israel developed a strong diplomatic posture in the region and worldwide. Israel developed strategic ties with Arab states and the states of the Eastern Mediterranean. It has built close ties with the EU's Visegrad group of Central European states, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, as well as Austria and Italy. Israel upgraded its diplomatic and trade relations with the states of Africa and Central and South America, as well as with India, Japan, and South Korea. And she gives credit, where I think credit is due, that a lot of this was done at the behest of Benjamin Netanyahu. She said the second reason Israel's diplomatic position is likely to soon crash is because Lapid and Defense Minister Benny Gantz, along with most of their partners, do not share Netanyahu's diplomatic vision. Lapid is set to become foreign minister. Lapid, Gantz, and the rest of the members of the incoming coalition are members of Israel's elite class. Israel's elite encompasses the political left, the media, the senior brass of the security establishment, the senior leadership of the foreign and justice ministries, and right-wingers who prefer their company and plaudits to those of members of their own camp. Israel's elites, almost to the man, believe Israel's diplomatic position is exclusively a function of its relations with the Beltway establishment. The closer Israel is to the American ruling class, the stronger it is internationally. And this is just absurd. Do you think that anybody's going to love Israel? No, they're not going to. And so Blinken, he was interviewed this week. I don't have time to play the clip today, but he goes on about, they asked him about the Golan Heights and the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Congress the other day. And he said, Israel's in control of the Golan Heights. Now, this is they're breaking with everything that Trump did with regard to Israel. They don't even like the embassy in Jerusalem. In that regard, Daniel Greenfield, a great writer who I would highly recommend that you read, he writes for a Front Page magazine. Sometimes his article on Front Page got picked up by the Jewish press. And if it comes up, here we go. His article, published on June 10th, just Thursday, is titled Biden's, I hate pop-ups. Good grief. I don't want to sign up for email. I know how to do that. And I'm not going to buy anything that pops up that annoys me. A decade ago, Vice President Biden paid a visit to Jerusalem. Like any trip by an emissary of the Obama administration, it wasn't a goodwill tour, but a combination of provocation and shakedown. While Biden was in Israel, 2 construction projects received partial approval in a multi-stage process from the city of Jerusalem. Biden responded by staying up in his hotel room and refusing to come down for an hour. When he did come down, he hugged Netanyahu and assured him, just remember that I'm your best friend here. Biden's definition of friendship is the backstabbing kind, because after that, he and the entire Obama administration began attacking Israel over a decision made by a local urban agency. And it went on, the Biden administration or the Obama administration after the election, a few weeks before the swearing in, they didn't veto Resolution 2334. So this is highly problematic. It comes within a context. So Yossi Cohen is out, and then this article that's in the Washington Post the other day that says that, here it is, Russia's set to arm Iran with an eye in space. The report is, in the Washington Post, Russia's going to let them use their advanced, at least some of their advanced, not super advanced, but some of their advanced spy satellite technology, Iran, so they can track Israel and that type of thing. Now, Putin was interviewed, and he said, that's absurd. I'm not going to do that. It's not true. Not true, not true, not true. So the answer is, I don't know whether it's true or not. It was the Washington Post. which has a tendency to be a bit of a Democratic Party and administration mouthpiece. We all know that. So I don't know if this article was planted in the Washington Post by the administration, because they knew that if they leaked it to the Washington Post, it's going to get published, and it's going to ding Putin before Biden has to go meet with him. So it might be a way to get at Putin to make Biden look good. You understand the propaganda thing that we're in, the narrative building? So this is all going on. So I don't know if this is true or not, but it is very problematic if it's happening. Yossi Cohen, on his way out. Now, under Yossi Cohen, he'd been the head of Mossad for a while. There were some incredible things that were done. Remember, these are the safes in the building in Tehran that house the nuclear archive of the Iranian government. We know that there were attacks made on Natanz. We know that Farid Kazed was assassinated last year was it last year or this year? I can't even remember. Recently in Tehran, in a kind of a very incredible thing. So he gave an interview on his way out, and he exposed a lot of things. He said, Cohen does not take responsibility for a specific operation, but reveals for the first time the behind-the-scenes things that are going on. So with regard to the head of the Iranian nuclear program, he said, listen, if the scientist is willing to change careers and will not hurt us anymore, then yes, sometimes we offer them a free pass. Question, did you ever approach an Iranian scientist? I just give you an example. And he understood who was approaching him and says, dear friend, perhaps you want to become a piano teacher. Cohen, yes. So Israel reached out to him and they gave him a choice, and he wouldn't agree to it, and so he's gone. This is from the Tehran Times saying that he essentially admits this. And it is a stunning interview, and I think in the notes we'll have some of this. So now what Israel's doing is can you zoom back out? Israel is assessing what happened with the operation at the facility. And look, this is from the Intel lab. This is, I think I have a video here. Yeah. So here, there's no sound on this. This is just some of the satellite technology and things where they've determined that this is like an underground facility. And so they've made up these 3D, some of the intelligence agencies have made up these 3D assessments of what's going on with Iran underneath this. It looks just like a mountainside, but here it is. It's got this, incredibly detailed rooms and storage and redundant power plants. It's essentially, in many respects, it's similar to what I showed you from Google and Facebook south of here. It's all underground. Same thing. So this is in Iran, and this is all being assessed. At the same time this is going on, there is these reports. Memory has a great, and I think I have a link to that one also in the notes. Memory has put up some YouTube videos that came from Pakistan, and in Pakistan, one of the things they have is this Islamic scholar. This guy died over 20 years ago, but they have a YouTube channel that reposts his videos. And here he's saying, look, the Palestinians, the Arabs, he says, are going to be punished. And he talks about what he thinks is coming, which is a rebuilt temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. That Al-Aqsa and the Dome of the Rock are going to be destroyed in some war that comes. This is very interesting that this is like 30 years old, this video, and it's got hundreds of thousands of views now. Also in connection with this thing is they have this, took this out of the Washington Post from about 6 years ago, and their missile can go to, guess where? Look what's in the circle. And they say, we're going to go against, I guess I forgot to insert the video. There's a video that they have. You can find it at Memory, and you can go link to it on YouTube, where it talks about they don't like Israel, the United States, or India. So when you see this picture at the beginning of the video, you see the chessboard. What are the two flags there on those two chess pieces? Israel and India. Because they say, we have nuclear weapons. Israel fears us because Iran doesn't have them. We do. And this is what we think of Israel. And they show these graphics that show you're within missile range of us, and we're going to take care of you. So what they're doing in Israel right now is they're assessing what all the stuff that's going on, what Pakistan capabilities, Iran's developing capabilities, what the Biden administration is doing to get this JCPOA agreement back in place, and how did we do when we attacked Hamas in Gaza, and apply it to what they call the Third Lebanon War. Now, this is where it has Bible prophecy significance, because this is going to happen on the mountains of Israel in the north. Very pastoral looking. I've driven that border. It looks like California. You just don't know that Hezbollah is right on the other side of the fence that you can see as you drive along. And there's tunnels probably underneath part of where you're going, and there's over 100,000 rockets that they can launch. So this is what INSS also talked about, the next war in the north, and I'll be talking more about that as we go forward. Blinken said in an interview the other day that Iran's nuclear breakout time is a matter of weeks if violations continue. So what are we going to do? We're going to go back to the JCPOA, which wasn't going to prevent them from doing this anyway. The whole thing is absurd. So I've told you to remind me to say something about the Israeli election, but now I don't remember. So you don't remember either, do you? It's a very tenuous political thing there. I support Israel. It's from where we get a lot of our biblical heritage. Well, really, all of our biblical heritage comes from that region. So we can understand what Jesus did for us and the two comings of the Messiah. It's all very, it's unfolding right in front of us. And it's starting to come together. So we're going to continue to talk about it because it is important. But there's a war coming in the north. And the question is, how is Israel going to be able to handle that? Now, there are people that are involved in the, Kochavi is still head of the Israeli Defense Force, and they still have the Israeli Air Force. But this is all very problematic when you have an Islamist party sitting in the security cabinet. In fact, when you look at the some of the videos from the Pakistani TVs, they talk about a hudna. They actually come right out and say, this is a hudna. We're entering into a truce with Israel in Gaza because it's a hudna. And in Islamic thought and theology, a hudna is what you do when you are weak. You make a peace agreement. Then when you're strong, you can break the peace agreement again. So I think this is all very biblical. The Abraham Accords are involved in this. I do think that we're missing a lot. And then there's this one story that has been appearing in a number of places, but there was a big article in today's Washington Post about this coup attempt in Jordan. And the conclusion of David Ignatius, and I'm no fan of David Ignatius, but it's a pretty good article. You should go read it at the Washington Post website. He talks about this coup and that there were some people involved in the coup that tried to get Jordan, change the government in Jordan so they could get into the Abraham Accords or the Trump peace deal, to change Jordan's orientation or to get Jordan out of controlling the Temple Mount. So this Washington Post piece is blaming Trump and Jared Kushner. And it may or may not be true. I have no way of knowing. I'm just telling you what's reported, and it's being picked up by press outlets all over the world. There clearly was a coup attempt, and there were Saudi people close to Mohammed bin Salman, that were involved in this. And then there are messages that people have seen that talk about some other outside third parties that might be involved. And a lot of people think it's Jared Kushner. He's got that Institute for Peace that he started. But this is what I was going to tell you, and I'll finish with this. So this narrative thing is a big deal. They got to have this narrative. So when Netanyahu, he doesn't like losing. I'm pretty sure I know that about him. He came out and said, so Naftali Bennett said, listen, I'm never going to join with the left parties. I ran on a platform that I would never go into a government with them. I'm in with the Netanyahu side or not, or I'm out. But he didn't, not only did he not do that, now he's going to be prime minister. So a lot of people are upset. Like Caroline Glick, in one of the elections, a couple elections ago, she ran on the Yamina list for Knesset. It's safe to say that she is very down on Naftali Bennett right now. And other people who ran with him. But this happened to Netanyahu too. I mean, Naftali Bennett was his chief of staff at one point, and now he will have nothing to do with Netanyahu. So what really unites the anti-Netanyahu or the government now is that they hate Netanyahu. So Netanyahu came out and said that Bennett saying he would do this and then not turning around and doing the exact opposite is the greatest election fraud in history. So what do you think happened in Israel with the people who didn't like Netanyahu? That's incitement. He's trying to get at an insurrection. He's trying to cause violence. That's not what Netanyahu said. Okay? But they saw how it worked with what happened in the United States. So now they're going to port it over to Netanyahu. It's the whole narrative thing. If people can't see that, I question their judgment. And they may like that it's being done because they don't like Netanyahu. That's fine, okay? But I'm just saying is this narrative thing is always being done in our politics now, and you got to be on watch for it. It's a postmodern way of doing everything. It's killed the church, it's killing politics, and it's going to lead to someone who's going to have the ultimate narrative. He's going to come with a mouth speaking great lies. Do you think the world is less set up for that now than it was, say, a month ago? No, it's more set up for it now than ever. That's my concern. But we know that this would happen, as I say all the time. What do you think the end times are going to look like anyway? But look, God's in control. He's not surprised by any of this. And we have work to do till we're out of here. So, let's pray. Father, thanks for your word. Pray you'll bless us as we go this week. Help us to be people of truth, to stand for truth, for righteousness, and always speaking the truth in love and sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.